again, if the barometer here is consciousness, and if we speak of consciousness as water, as in many traditions it is done, then what do we know? Water always finds its level. So water always finds its level. Therefore, you will never know at what point that free will is yours or the Almighty. You should never know. Why? Because you cannot know.
Yeah, so the question is, since the ultimate truth is beyond words and description and individuality, like we don't really exist in the way we think we do, how do you square that with this sort of, I'm trying to think of a way to phrase the question. If nothing really exists, then why are we here, I guess? And I don't mean that in a fatalist way, like here in this room, because if what is meant to be will be no matter what, because the absolute is functioning as it will, no matter what. Do we have any choice in being here in this room? I guess my question is, do we have a choice in this? Like, do you think we have a choice in coming here, or is it, or not, I guess, ultimately?
So I would like to first maybe clarify something, because when you started, you said that if none of this exists, right? And I've never said that. I've simply posited that there is this understanding with which some of the spiritual traditions operate with, and it's one of the kernel of understanding, that none of this already exists. The platform of understanding that we work with, or at least my own understanding, is not on that, let's say, level of negation of existence of this reality. Instead, it has another take. Ultimately speaking, of course, the perspective of negation and all-embracing perspective, they all converge somewhere. It has to be, obviously. But it's a choice, of course, here, given to the philosophical, let's say, interpretation of our place in the world that matters. And of course, we need to unpack this properly. And the philosophical repercussions of giving this world a reality that it deserves, whilst understanding that the reality of this world, it's not an independent or even subordinate reality to the ultimate reality, but rather the expression of ultimate reality. So the preciousness, sacredness of this world, it's in the fact that it is, we can immediately jump into that religious language because it will be very helpful for the moment. It's God in form. So, in other words, the absolute, for it to be in any way aware of itself, is inseparable from the form that it takes. This is the loftiest understanding of Trikashaivism and creme de la creme of Tantra. That the world itself is the body of Shiva. Shiva here stands for awareness. So the world of forms and phenomena, although transitory, although ever-changing, although subject to birth and decay, in essence is nothing other than awareness. So everything here, every strata of creation, is an expression of that awareness. And that awareness expresses itself to such fullness, it undergoes such complete and integral, we could even say honest transfiguration, that it conceals its essence in the world of forms and phenomena, in the world per se. So this is an important adjustment before we go to the question of choice of free will. How does this then translates into us having this uniquely, acutely expressed sense of individuality? Because this is truth. This is undeniable thing. We can't pretend, no amount of philosophical meanderings and positioning can take away that fact that there is this experience of I-amness. And this experience of I-amness also congealed and encapsulated in this, knowing I'm speaking through this instrumentality. I'm not some just voice echoing in a room. I'm not just some kind of ephemeral thing that moved from the rented apartment, happened to be here, and I'm not going, like, this is like no, please, let's not go there, okay? Because, in California, I love this when the folks, during the height of all that, would tell me, I'm completely disembodied right now, could you please help me? And you go through that, okay, well, raise your right hand. Are you sure it's your right hand? Okay. Make sure, please, then. Put your hand on your right thigh. Please do it for me. It's ridiculous. But people ask you. I'm disembodied. I'm feeling completely out of body right now. I don't know where I am, Raise your hand. Put it on your right thigh. Don't put it on the thigh of your neighbor unless she's your wife, okay? You're going to get in trouble because you don't know if the chap next to her is her husband. It's all that fun is thrown there, but that fun is actually not funny. I'm doing my work. And so that person shows how they made fool of themselves. You see? With all due respect. So all these talks of I'm not embodied are, excuse me, forgive me, in the head. See? So taking us back here to this acute experience of where consciousness projects so emphatically that all the filters are at work. Like, for those of you who are not familiar, this is your first direct experience. This is like, I don't know how about you, I like different tastes in my food. I like it layered. Okay? I don't like just thick spread of chocolate on top of the bread. There needs to be layers. So the flavors all play themselves out, so the completeness on the tongue. See? So in other words, I'm finding the ways to go away from your question for free will and choice before we even begin to answer. So this acute experience of individuality, consciousness projecting itself, is, first of all, to be contemplated on before we can move to, am I here, am I not here? Am I here out of my choice, out of my will? Or something playing itself out and I'm simply being taken for a ride? You see? So what if you are relaxed enough, and if you are, I would even say, if the membranes of not trying to grasp it, but trying to allowing yourself to feel into it, you may already begin to feel this, your own insights, how it is kind of at once. So the free will is not a fixed phenomena. There's no such thing as free will in terms of my will, or just thy will. So there is this dynamic. There is this dynamic must be between my and thy. There must be some kind of factor that determines at what point the choice is exercised fully And where am I just simply rolling with it? Or where I'm not even having any choice, I'm a sleepwalker on whose behalf decisions are being made. One way or another, it begins to boil down to how awake one is. It begins to boil down how much consciousness there is. As simple as that. At the level where individuality reigns supreme, there must be very, very little of that free will. There must be very little choice. We are simply tossed around by the wind or the waves or the both. And the choices begin to be made in proportion, or rather the degree to which we are making choices are in proportion to the amount of consciousness we embody. It has to be. And this is very often that territory, that area. That area, where is, at what point, individual will becomes the will, let's say, for the ease of it, of Creator, or the will of the Almighty. Is it at all times, at what point I have anything to say, or I have any saying? Does it even happen? Can one even find out? Reflect on this. Again, if the barometer here is consciousness, and if we speak of consciousness as water, as in many traditions it is done, then what do we know? Water always finds its level. So water always finds its level. Therefore, you will never know at what point that free will is yours or the Almighty. You should never know. Why? Because you cannot know. Reflect on this, why that is. The hint is given. Water. It always finds its way. You see? If there is a dam, if there is some separation, water may have temporarily be at a different level. But as soon as you open that, as an irrigation system, water rushes quickly and finds its level and equalizes. So at all times, that is the barometer, that is the measure of what here is spoken of as choice making or free will. So in other words, now speaking about it in clinical kind of canonical academic way, with the rise of consciousness, there is direct and visceral rise of free will. With the rise of consciousness. And the fascinating thing is here is that that's where that begins to play itself in an extraordinarily way, is that we're no longer able to do anything for ourselves out of any desire for the lack or sense of lack that we may experience. Because the propensity here with the rise of consciousness is to experiencing everything from the level of consciousness. See? So in other words, all these qualities are then begin to flood the valley, flood the system. And the system becomes saturated with that. And a saturated system will never know how to exercise free will for personal gain. Because that's the only question of free will. Tell me what other free will interests us. Only for personal gain. There's no other free will. So there is no personal gain anymore. Why? Because the game is now being so upgraded that the system, the operating system, no longer works from that level. It doesn't need to. It no longer asks for anything because it is becoming self-sufficient. And therefore, again, it cannot know whether it has free will. It then becomes thy will. So this is why when you read the mystics, they just, they speak about it in a more poetic, maybe mystical, maybe more mysterious, maybe even more preferable way, So therefore that final, let thy will be done. So I've come as far as I could, my dear, beloved, now take me, take over, let thy will be done, okay? So this, you see, it's the same consciousness. The same consciousness that first eager to rise, eager to expand, eager to know, eager to be more, eager to complete that incompleteness. And when that begins to swell and expand, it then finds itself equalizing. So delegating oneself here feels as the most obvious thing to do, because one delegates oneself to the reality of who one is. So let thy will be done here. I'm sure when Meister Eckhart said that, it wasn't like, poor me, Meister Eckhart. No. Otherwise he wouldn't have been declared heretic and had to denounce and do all that, go through the whole enchilada and to kind of like, no, of course, it's a very clear experience of self-sufficiency and fullness, where nothing can be asked simply because nothing is lacking anymore. So free will is there and then fully exercised. So the one then holds consciousness at the needle point. At the needle point, everything, every passing comment, every galaxy, black hole, everything is vibrating there at the needle point. Suzuki Roshi, who is to say that when I cross my leg to drink tea, the whole universe is not in repose drinking tea in that very moment? So much on free will I can share now.
That's beautiful. Thank you.
Welcome.